Hey guys! Tonight we drift into the incense-sweet, footstep-echoing, faintly sandalwood-scented corridors of Imperial China. Not the famous dynasties you memorized in high school, though. Yes, we'll pass through the Ming and Qing eventually, but the softer, and stranger spaces in between. You're not a general, not a scholar, not a concubine or merchant or mystic. You're something much more complicated. You're a eunuch. Right now, you're standing just outside the palace gates. It's early morning, though the sky already glows like soaked silk. Around you, the city groans awake. A cart creaks down a rutted alley. A noodle vendor clatters iron pots, and a dog with suspiciously political eyes stares too long. You're clutching a letter of recommendation in one hand and a bundle of clothes in the other. You've made a decision, or maybe someone else made it for you. Either way, what's between your legs is about to be simplified. You probably won't survive this. Not statistically. Not if the village rumors are true. Not if the operation goes wrong or the wound festers, or the palace physician sneezes at the wrong moment. But let's pretend for now you do survive. Let's pretend you walk through those massive lacquered gates into a courtyard paved in storybook stones, and hand your trembling letter to a clerk in silk slippers and perpetual disinterest. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. I'm always curious where we're all drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're ushered into a waiting room that smells like powdered ginger and wet clay. A eunuch, older than mountains and slightly translucent, slides across the floor like a ghost in felt shoes. He doesn't ask questions. He just hands you a folded robe and a small wooden tablet with your number on it. Number 203. You sit. You wait. Somewhere, a wind chime jingles. Someone coughs. Time drips slowly. Eventually, a door opens. The operation room isn't what you expect. There are no scalpels or sterilized steel, just bamboo mats, a bowl of wine, and a man who's seen too much. He doesn't smile. He points to a stone bench and tells you to drink. The wine tastes like vinegar and regret. A cloth is tied around your eyes not for modesty, but to keep you from watching your future vanish. And then, darkness? What happens next has been described with too much enthusiasm by certain scholars. The short version, they remove everything, not just one part, the whole arrangement. It's called a clean cut. You bleed a lot. They stuff the wound with herbs, sew it shut with horsehair, and press a brick against your abdomen to stop the swelling. You wake up somewhere else, on your side, drenched in sweat and confusion. The pain is exquisite, not sharp, not dull, just constant. A wide, humming hurt that stretches to your fingertips. Someone spoons cool rice porridge into your mouth and hums a lullaby that predates the calendar. You're not dead. That's good. You're also not quite alive. That's normal. They tell you not to sit up, not to move too quickly, not to think too hard, and certainly not to cry, because tears, in your new profession, are currency, and you'll need to save every drop. Historians still argue whether the full procedure originated in the Zhou dynasty or earlier, but by the time you're here, let's say late Ming, it's been perfected into a ritual. You're no longer a man. You're not quite a servant. You're something in between. And that in-betweenness is exactly what makes you useful. In the coming weeks, your bandages are changed. The brick is removed. You're taught how to walk again without aggravating the scar. The palace physician checks your pulse and declares you structurally sound. Congratulations, you've passed. They give you your uniform, a simple silk robe in pale blue, tied with a ribbon that means in training. You're assigned a sleeping mat in a shared dormitory. You're offered bland soup, watered tea, and a list of palace rules that might as well be a short novel. You are now property of the inner court. Outside, the empire stretches from snowy mountains to jungle rivers, but your world is a sequence of corridors and thresholds, of whispered names and invisible hierarchies. There's a garden you're allowed to see, a pond you may approach on alternate Wednesdays, and a particular tile you must never step on, not because it's cursed, but because a retired grand eunuch once slipped there and declared it off-limits in a fit of concussed rage. The other trainees barely speak. One hums quietly to himself. One never blinks. One smells faintly of burnt cinnamon and might have killed a man. But it's rude to ask. You keep your head down, your robe tied, and your expression somewhere between curious and harmless. A few nights in, you dream of the moment your life split into before and after. In the dream, it doesn't hurt. There's just a weightless feeling, like something has been removed from inside your shadow. You wake up to a bell. Training begins at dawn. The bell tolls with a kind of quiet smugness, as if it knows how little sleep you got and how much your legs ache. You roll off your mat like a forgotten dumpling, every joint protesting. The robe bunches awkwardly around your waist, but you no longer bother adjusting it. That, apparently, is your first lesson in the palace. Comfort is a pre-rebellion luxury. You and your fellow trainees file into the courtyard, heads lowered, steps quiet. The morning air is cool and thick with mist, curling around stone lanterns and the tops of sculpted hedges like a tired dragon. Somewhere above, a white heron watches you with clinical disdain. Welcome to your new life. You start the day with bowing, a lot of bowing. Bow to the sun, bow to the trainer, bow to the floor, in case the ancestors are listening. Then you practice walking. Not regular walking. Palace walking. Heel, toe, pause, softly, smoothly, silently, like a breeze disguised as a person. If your shoes scuff or your sleeve rustles, you start over. The second lesson, breathing. There is apparently a correct way to inhale in front of royalty. It involves holding your chest still and letting only your lower ribs expand, which feels like trying to drink tea through your toes. But you practice, again and again, until you can breathe without your shoulders twitching, your nose whistling, or your essence disturbing the key of the court. You laugh once just a little and are immediately assigned an extra hour of kneeling. The floor tiles are warmed by the sun, but still manage to feel like punishment. At some point, your legs go numb. That's good. That's progress. Historians still argue whether this level of training was necessary or just ceremonial fluff, but for you, it feels very real. The senior eunuchs float through the halls like ghosts with appointments. They seem to know everything which ministers are secretly feuding, which concubines might be pregnant, which teacups were touched by which hands at what hour. They are memory, rumor, and ledger rolled into one. You are not yet one of them. After bowing and walking and more breathing, you're introduced to the 3 rules of presence. 1. Be invisible. 2. Be reliable. 3. Be forgotten the moment you leave the room. You're taught how to listen with interest without revealing opinion, how to appear engaged without seeming presumptuous, how to nod in a way that says both I understand and I was never here. You memorize ranks. A eunuch who serves the empress is not equal to one who serves her brother's tea servant, unless that tea servant once saved a prince from choking, that sort of thing. The hierarchy isn't written anywhere. It lives in glances, gestures, and the slight curvature of a bow. Your first task is simple cleaning incense burners in a meditation room you're not allowed to meditate in. You kneel beside each burner, scoop out the ashes, and gently polish the bronze. The scent clings to your fingers. Jasmine, sandalwood, and something sharper, like pine smoke and secrets. You work in silence. Always silence. Even sneezes are considered discourteous. At meals, You sit on your mat and eat from a shared tray. Rice, broth, and pickled vegetables. You chew slowly. You learn not to ask what the pickles used to be. At night, your dreams flicker like candlelight. You dream of the sound of silk rustling in distant rooms, of footsteps you're not allowed to follow, of laughter, sharp and bright, echoing off carved stone. One evening, as the moon bleeds into the courtyard, you're summoned to the senior hall. You shuffle in, bow 3 times, and are greeted by a eunuch, so senior his eyebrows have their own opinions. He holds a scroll and looks at you over it. "You can write?" he asks. You nod. "Brush and ink, yes." He raises an eyebrow. "You'll mop floors tomorrow. If you're still alive after that, we'll talk about ink." So, the next day, you're handed a bucket, a rag, and a task mop the jade-tiled hallway outside the archive. At midnight, with no lantern. Because, you see, cleaning in the dark teaches humility and bruises. You slip twice. You learn to find cracks by touch. You mutter apologies to a statue of a turtle large enough to ride. You are startled horrifically by a cat with the soul of a tax official. You mop. You kneel. You mop again. At some point in the silent dark, your fingers begin to understand the stone. The rhythm becomes meditative. The pain in your knees sharpens into something clean, almost bright. You are no longer mopping. You are polishing memory, shining centuries, honoring those who knelt here before you. And that's the third strange lesson of the palace suffering. Done properly, becomes almost sacred. A week later, the scroll returns. This time, you're handed a brush. Your first job is copying a list of towel inventories from 30 years ago. The calligraphy must be perfect. The ink must not blot. The characters must not lean, or lurch, or twitch. You work slowly, like a spider drawing its web. Your hand cramps, your neck locks. You are forbidden to sigh. Somewhere behind you, a senior eunuch whispers, "We can fix sloppiness. We can't fix slowness." You nod and speed up, just a little. As the days stretch into weeks, you begin to recognize faces. The man who hums while dusting scrolls is named Ping. The one who never blinks is Bo. The cinnamon-scented possible murderer is, alarmingly, your new calligraphy partner. You still don't speak much, but you bow a little lower now, and your breathing barely disturbs the air. The morning begins, as it always does, with a whisper. No one actually says, "Wake up." The sound that rouses you is subtler than speech. The rustle of robes, the soft tap of wooden soles on stone, the distant hiss of water being ladled into a basin. You sit up on your mat, joints stiff, and dreams already dissolving, and begin folding your blanket with the reverence of someone handling ancient treaties. Today, there is new training. You and the other junior eunuchs are herded not unkindly into a smaller courtyard lined with potted bamboo. It's here you're taught the next essential skill of court life, how to disappear. You're already invisible in status. Now you must become invisible in presence. The instructor is a skeletal man named Jiao, whose voice rarely climbs above a breath. The emperor does not like echoes. He murmurs, pacing in front of you, and walls here have long memories. Your first drill is simple. You must walk from one end of the courtyard to the other, without making a sound. You fail spectacularly. Your shoes scuff, your robe swishes, someone sneezes, and a single pebble skitters across the stone like a tiny, vengeful demon. Jiao sighs without expression. Again. You go again, and again. One student is pulled aside for breathing too loudly. Another is instructed to loosen his belt, apparently it squeaks. You spend hours adjusting your stride, tightening your movements, learning to glide rather than walk. Eventually, your footsteps are silent enough to confuse a cat. Then comes the art of the bow. You already know the basic courtesies. Now you're introduced to the 23 variations of reverence used within the palace walls. Each one has rules: angle of the head, depth of the bend, hand position, duration. A bow to a visiting minister is not the same as a bow to a first-ranked concubine. Bow too low, and you're mocking them. Too shallow, and it's treason. You practice before a mirror polished with ash and water, adjusting the tilt of your neck by the width of a hair. Jiao taps you with a bamboo stick when you falter. The stick is not cruel, but it is persuasive. Think of it like dance, he says, almost smiling. A very nervous dance, performed on a floor of rumors. Somewhere behind you, Bo coughs in agreement. Later that afternoon, you're assigned to tea service, not to pour it heavens, no, but to observe how it's done. You stand silently in a corner while a senior eunuch named Anne brews a pot of plum blossom green tea with the gravity of a man performing surgery. The trick, and whispers, is not in the leaves, it's in the pause. He lets the hot water rest before pouring. He holds the cup for exactly 3 breaths. He places it down with a gentle clink, so delicate it sounds like a bell dreaming of itself. You notice how the noblewoman he serves doesn't even glance at him. That's the goal. Service so flawless, it becomes scenery. Historians still argue, and mutters between pores, whether our presence was power or performance. They forget it was both. You spend the evening in the laundry quarters, washing your own robe in near darkness. There's a ritual to that, too. Scrub the silk gently, rinse it twice, and hang it where the moonlight can find it. No soap, just water and patience. Afterward, you sit under the eaves and stare at the stars. You're joined by Ping, who offers you a candied plum and hums an off-key folk song. It's not much of a conversation, but it's the most human contact you've had in days. You get used to it, he says, finally, without specifying what it is. You nod anyway. You fall asleep that night with the faint taste of plum on your tongue and the memory of your own footsteps vanishing behind you. The next week brings a new challenge. You're summoned to a smaller chamber tucked behind the kitchen, where an elderly eunuch in a robe the color of old paper hands you a sealed letter and says, simply, "Deliver this." You bow and accept the scroll with both hands. No further instructions are given. This is a test. You walk through 5 corridors, 2 courtyards, and 1 suspiciously quiet garden. You pass by guards who pretend not to see you, nobles who glance at you with faint disgust, and a small dog that growls with the conviction of a war general. You never meet its eyes. The scroll is delivered. You bow. You return. No one mentions it again, but your name is moved slightly higher on the duty roster the next day. Progress? Later, in the dormitory, Ping asks, "What was in the letter?" You shrug. "I didn't open it." He nods, satisfied. "Good. That's lesson 4. Don't read the mail." Don't want to read the mail. It's a subtle difference, and one you'll come to understand deeply in the years ahead. Some nights, the palace feels like a maze designed not to confuse you, but to strip you of identity. Your name is now spoken less often than your number. You learn to recognize people by their silhouettes and footsteps. You begin to forget the shape of your own handwriting. But the strange thing is, you don't mind. Because here, invisibility isn't failure, it's power. It means no one sees you coming. And sometimes, no one sees you leave. Tonight, your assignment changes. You've officially graduated from silent walking and scroll delivery. Now, you're on the midnight cleaning crew. Specifically the Jade Turtle Hall. Don't let the name fool you, it's not as cute as it sounds. The Jade Turtle Hall is one of the oldest buildings in the Forbidden City. It houses nothing of political importance. No emperors reside there. No concubines sigh through the silk-draped windows. Its grand claim to fame is a massive bronze turtle the size of a dinner table, carved with 1,000 names in miniature script. It is said that anyone who can read every name on its shell will either go mad or be instantly promoted. You believe the second part less and less each night. Your shift begins at dusk and ends when the sun peeks over the lotus pond. You mop, you sweep, you wipe dust from scroll cases no one has touched since the Mongols were a serious concern. You polish the turtle. The turtle never looks impressed. Sometimes, in the flicker of lantern light, you think the turtle moves, just slightly, just enough to question your grip on reality. Then you blink, and it's still a silent lump of judgment and oxidized ambition. Your only company is a shrine to the god of writing, who glares down at you with ink-stained eyebrows and a quill that might be made of phoenix feather. You bow to him once per hour, not because you're told to, just because it seems wise. There's a rhythm to this work, though, a slow, comforting monotony. The drag of the broom, the soft clatter of scroll tubes, the rhythmic creak of the wooden beams as the building settles around you. Occasionally, a mouse offers its tiny, disapproving face from under the altar. Sometimes you hum, quietly, no words, just sound. One night, a senior eunuch named Lee floats into the hall like a rumor wearing shoes. He doesn't speak for the first 10 minutes, just watches you polish the turtle's right hind leg with a cloth that smells vaguely of vinegar and despair. Finally, he says, "You're doing it wrong." You freeze mid-scrub. "Not the turtle," he adds. "Your posture. You'll ruin your back before you're 30. Bend from the hips, not the spine." You adjust. He nods and leaves without another word. Historians still argue whether eunuchs were trained in domestic work first out of necessity or as a form of passive obedience conditioning. Whatever the case, you now wield a mop with the grace of a calligrapher and the caution of a diplomat. One evening, you discover an old fan tucked behind a cabinet, paper, bamboo, and inked with a single line of poetry. 1,000 clouds pass, and none remember the mountain. You don't tell anyone. You keep it folded inside your robe pocket, a small rebellion in ink and lacquer. By the second week, you begin to notice the palace at night has its own personality, less formal, more honest. You hear things, muffled sobs from the concubine's wing, laughter from the guard's quarters, the low twang of a guqin somewhere far away. There is music in this place, but it never plays during daylight. And then there's the archive ghost. Bo swears she's real. Ping says she's just the wind in the silk. But one night, as you're organizing scrolls by dynasty and ink tone, because someone, somewhere, once thought that was a good idea, you feel it too, a presence. Not menacing, not cold, just watching. You bow, out of habit or self-preservation. The feeling leaves. You don't mention it. The scrolls are your new task. By the way, after the jade turtle accepts your persistent scrubbing, you're promoted, if such a term even applies here, to archive assistant. This means long nights spent organizing lists of imperial gifts, food inventory, and grain tax reports. You now know, for example, that the emperor once received 6 crates of lychee from a southern province, and that the transportation alone required 50 horses, 3 boats, and 1 small war. You also know the precise year that frog oil became a taxable good. You're not sure what frog oil is. You don't want to know. Your brushwork improves. Your posture straightens. Your hands no longer shake when you write the character for province, which you used to botch so badly it looked like a startled duck. The head archivist is a thin, bitter man named Ren, who smells of mildew and faintly of revenge. He teaches through silence and eye narrowing. You spend most of your shift second-guessing every character you copy. One night, you misplace a single scroll. Just one. You tear the archive apart. Scroll racks, cabinets, even behind the giant turtle. Don't ask how you got it to move. It's best not to remember. Finally, you find it inside your own robe sleeve, where it slipped while you were adjusting the belt. You bow 5 times to Ren, who doesn't speak for the rest of the week. You're not sure if that's good or bad. Despite the constant stress of being both invisible and flawless, you begin to take pride in your work. There's something deeply satisfying about knowing where a scroll from the 6th year of Emperor Hongji's reign is stored, or being able to quote grain delivery amounts from memory. It's like you're building a map of the empire, not the rivers and borders kind, but the beating, breathing version, what it eats, who it honors, what it forgets. One night, as you close the last scroll and stretch your fingers toward the moonlight, you hear a laugh from the courtyard. It's Ping, humming again. You join him outside and sit under the lanterns. He hands you half a candied chestnut. "You're quiet lately," he says. "So are you?" "Exactly." You both laugh, a real laugh, which feels like drinking cold water after a long, hot silence. That night, the ghost doesn't visit. Or maybe she does, but smiles for once. It starts with a tap on your shoulder during breakfast. 3 fingers, light but precise, like a coded message. You turn, it's Lee again, the one who corrected your turtle mopping technique. He doesn't explain. He doesn't even greet you. He just nods, gestures with a flick of his sleeve, and walks away. You follow. Past the laundry courtyard, through a side door you've never noticed, down a hallway that smells faintly of persimmons and polished copper, and into a chamber that is surprisingly small. Inside, 2 other eunuchs are waiting, one you recognize from the calligraphy room, the other from nighttime incense rotations. Both give you tight, knowing nods. You bow back. The silence is ceremonial. On the table in the middle of the room sits an object of immense power, a clay chamber pot. Congratulations! You've been selected to assist with the Emperor's personal hygiene. Welcome to the most prestigious, stressful, and bizarre promotion in the eunuch world, bathroom duty. Historians still argue whether this role was intended as punishment, reward, or both. But in practice, it means you're about to learn everything there is to know about one man's gastrointestinal health. You are briefed, in detail. The Emperor's schedule is divided into 6 daily blocks, each punctuated by carefully measured mealtimes, meditation periods, and, yes, moments when nature calls. Your job is to ensure everything runs smoothly, respectfully, and, above all, odorlessly. Lai explains this with a straight face. He has likely not smiled in 20 years. You're assigned to Block 3 late morning, right after tea and before his daily poetry reading. Apparently, he prefers calm digestion while rhyming. You memorize the route to the private latrine chamber. You learn how to fold the wiping cloth just so. You are warned never to speak unless spoken to. You are warned even more strongly never to laugh, even if something extremely funny happens. You are also informed that the chamber pot must be swapped out immediately after use and carried with both hands at chest height. Yes, chest height. The reasoning is never explained, and you are far too afraid to ask. On your first shift, you nearly faint. Not because of the smell, which is surprisingly mild, his diet is famously light, but from sheer stress. You kneel too fast. You bow too deeply. You almost spill the water basin, but you survive. And after that, you begin to settle in. The Emperor, to your astonishment, is polite, quiet, almost gentle in the way he holds himself. He rarely looks directly at you, but once, just once, he says, "You're steadier than the last one." You don't know whether that's a compliment, an insult, or a warning, but you bow, and he nods, and the room exhales again. Weeks pass. You learn his favorite wiping cloth texture, cloud silk, preferred incense osmanthus, and that he likes a brief silence before and after the process, what Lee calls respectful framing. You also learn to manage the servants who manage you. There are dozens of people supporting this ritual. Water carriers, basin polishers, incense boys, floor sweepers. You're in the middle of this tiny empire within an empire, It is, in its own odd way, a palace within the palace. And with that comes status. Other eunuchs begin to notice you, bow slightly deeper, ask polite questions about your daily assignment. You deflect. Of course, modesty is expected, but the change is clear. You're no longer a low-tier scroll copier. You're now the emperor's intimate functionary. Ping is thrilled for you. You're one chamber pot away from real influence. He jokes over lunch, offering you an extra dumpling as tribute. Bo, less cheerfully, mutters, and one mistake away from exile. He's not wrong. There are rumors. Of course. One eunuch accidentally knocked over a basin once he now trims topiary trees in the coldest corner of the garden. Another lingered too long in the emperor's line of sight, sent to a border outpost with no return date. Still, your footing is steady. Your breathing is perfect. Your bowing has achieved something close to transcendental grace. Then, one day, the emperor speaks. Not just a comment, a conversation. He asks if you enjoy poetry. You freeze. A dozen thoughts crash together in your brain like startled chickens. What's the safe answer? What if he hates your favorite poem? What if he expects you to recite something? You nod and say, I admire the clarity of song verses, Your Majesty. He looks at you for a long moment. Then clarity is a rare thing. That's it. That's the entire exchange. But for the rest of the day, your heart flutters like a kite in storm wind. Later, you find a Song Dynasty poem scrawled on the back of an old towel inventory. You copy it, fold it into your sleeve, and carry it like a charm. The next week, the emperor recites a verse aloud while you prepare the incense. You recognize it. You smile. Just barely. He doesn't react, but he doesn't stop reciting either. Historians still debate how much influence eunuchs truly had on emperors, whether they swayed decisions or merely executed them. But in that quiet moment, with the scent of osmanthus hanging in the air and your breath steady and silent, you feel a strange weight shift. Not power, not yet. But proximity? And sometimes, in a place like this, proximity is everything. You've never cared much for tea, or at least you didn't before the palace, but now tea is your new obsession. Not because you like the taste. Honestly, some of these brews feel like someone boiled a tree, but because tea within the palace walls is code. You're assigned to serve in the tea gallery, an elegant room filled with painted screens, low lacquered tables, and the eternal, slightly steamy scent of boiling leaves. It's a quiet corner of the palace, but don't be fooled. This is where power tiptoes in silk slippers. Each tea session is technically a break, a chance for ministers, scholars, concubines, and visiting nobles to relax, pretend they like each other, and casually trade rumors under the cover of refined sips. You're not supposed to hear what they say, but you do. And it changes everything. Your job is to deliver the teapot, bow, and vanish. The problem is, the people you're serving are absolutely terrible at whispering, or maybe they assume you're not really there, which is, ironically, the best way to make a eunuch pay attention. You start with the basics. Who doesn't like whom? Who envies whom? Who is secretly sleeping with whose calligraphy tutor? These are the soft rumors, easily overheard, easily forgotten. But over time, the gossip gets heavier, sharper. Suddenly, someone's brother is being watched. Someone else might be reshuffled. A concubine from the southern quarter wants a rare lotus oil, but not for skincare, something about bribery or poison. You don't write any of this down, that would be suicidal, but you do remember it, perfectly. The palace hasn't trained you for nothing. One morning, as you're pouring tea for a magistrate with particularly aggressive eyebrows, you hear a sentence that freezes you mid-pour. If it reaches the Emperor's ears, we're finished. Now, that's interesting. You finish your pour, bow, retreat, and pretend to be deeply invested in wiping a non-existent tea stain from a side table. Your ears, however, are working overtime. It turns out someone's cousin misreported the rice tax figures for an entire province. That cousin may or may not have gambled away the missing grain. The magistrate is now desperately trying to reroute a shipment from a warehouse that may or may not exist. And you know this. Ping is both thrilled and horrified when you tell him. You can't know that, he whispers under his breath. But I do. Well, you can't say it. I didn't. You just did. To me. Now I know it. Now I'm part of it. He paces. You sip tea. Eventually, Ping decides the only logical thing is to do nothing, which, to be fair, is standard palace protocol, but in the following days, you begin to notice patterns. That magistrate begins attending tea less frequently. Another takes his place, one you recognize from an earlier scroll about warehouse logistics. Coincidence? Maybe. But the whisper network is shifting. You can feel it, like a draft in an otherwise sealed room. A few days later, you're summoned unusually to the tea master's private room. The tea master is a eunuch so old his wrinkles have wrinkles. He wears the same robe every day, and it still smells faintly of chrysanthemum and deep knowledge. He invites you to sit. You bow instead. You've been listening, he says calmly. You freeze. You're not the first, he continues, pouring a single cup for himself. You won't be the last. But here's the rule if you hear something dangerous. You never repeat it, not even in your dreams. You nod, unsure if this is a warning or a test, maybe both. He smiles faintly and sips his tea. Do you know why they let us serve in these rooms, he asks. You shake your head. Because we have no sons, no wives, no legacy, nothing to inherit. We are the perfect containers. They think we'll hold their secrets like a cup holds tea. He holds up his porcelain cup and then tilts it, letting a single drop fall to the floor. But even cups can crack. You bow again, lower this time. After that conversation, you're more careful. You still listen, but with distance, you memorize, but don't react. You let the whispers pass through you like wind through paper. Still, your proximity to the gossip makes you valuable. Your name quietly, softly starts appearing on new duty rosters. Escort duties, archive summaries, ceremony support. Each new assignment brings you closer to people who matter. One morning, you're sent to deliver tea to the Empress's poetry salon. The room is all lilac silk and soft string music. The concubines recline like bored orchids. You kneel, pour, bow, and almost escape until the Empress herself asks your name. You freeze. A dozen possible answers flash through your mind, including several fake ones. You give your real name softly. She nods. You pour neatly. Then she returns to her verse. Later that day, you find a poem scribbled on a napkin near the kitchen. It describes a silent servant who hears too much, sees too much, and yet remains invisible. You don't know who wrote it, but you fold it into your robe. It makes you feel seen. Historians still argue whether eunuchs manipulated gossip or merely survived it. Some were master spies. Others were just unlucky ears in the wrong hallway. You've decided to be neither. You won't chase power, but you'll stand very, very close to it. And if it whispers, you'll listen. By now, you've learned that the Forbidden City isn't a city, it's a labyrinth in disguise. You used to think it was just big. Now you realize it's endless. The corridors fold in on themselves like polite origami. The courtyards change shape depending on the season. Entire gardens appear and vanish depending on who's allowed to see them. Today, Your assignment is deceptively simple. Deliver an inkstone to the Hall of Supreme Harmony. Easy. That is, until you get lost halfway there. You take a wrong turn near the Vermilion Dragon Gate and end up in a part of the palace you've never seen before, a sunken courtyard, half shaded by gnarled pine trees, with a small round pool at the center. There's a parrot perched on a carved wooden beam. It stares at you. You stare back. Then it says, perfectly and with unholy clarity, "Don't touch the seal." You drop the inkstone. The parrot shrieks with laughter. A door creaks open behind you and a man in a faded official's robe peeks out. He eyes the shattered inkstone, the laughing bird, and you frozen in mid-bow. "Delivery," he says. "Yes," you mutter, sweeping the shards into your sleeve as if they're not your worst mistake this month. He sighs. "They always get lost. Welcome to the Department of Unrecorded Geometries." That is not a joke. Apparently, this department, forgotten in most rosters, handles the parts of the palace that shift, buildings that appear to move slightly when no one's looking, doorways that lead to rooms that lead to gardens that weren't there yesterday. It's a real thing. Well, mostly real. Historians still argue whether it was an actual bureau or just a nickname for a group of eccentric clerks who like to play tricks on new recruits. You're given a replacement inkstone, a cookie made of something disturbingly chewy, and a hand-drawn map that includes a suspiciously labeled detour. Avoid the Whispering Wall. You follow it, mostly. Along the way, you pass a staircase that only goes down. You pass a painting that seems to change expression each time you glance at it. You pass a courtyard with a tree that only blooms on one side. Eventually, you find your way to the Hall of Supreme Harmony. You deliver the inkstone. No one mentions the parrot. You do not ask questions. On your way back, you take a different route on purpose, because now you're curious. The palace isn't just a place, it's a personality. Every corner has a story. Every brick remembers footsteps. Every silk screen hides a mood. You start exploring in your spare moments carefully, respectfully, and never without a small pouch of candied ginger and plausible excuses. You discover a narrow hallway where your footsteps vanish entirely. A balcony where no one is allowed to speak. A garden that's never tended, but always perfect. Ping thinks you're mad. "We live here, and that's punishment enough," he says, chewing his third dumpling. Bo disagrees. "Let the place know you, or it will forget you." That night, you find a spot in the West Library Tower where the wind whistles in a perfect minor key. You lie on your back on the stone floor, robe folded beneath your head, and stare up at the ceiling's painted dragons. You feel, for the first time, like you are part of this place, not trapped by it, but woven into its folds. And then the bell rings. Back to work. You're moved to a new assignment, garden maintenance. This sounds dull. You are wrong. The Imperial Gardens are sacred. Every rock has been positioned according to principles that involve celestial balance, symbolic animal spirits, and, presumably, a severe lack of whimsy. You are told which trees to prune, which to bow to, and which to avoid entirely. You're given a rake and a scroll that reads, "Do not disturb the pine spirits." You assume that's metaphorical? It's not. One day, you rake too loudly near a twisted old tree. Your fingers swell for 3 days. Coincidence, maybe. Or maybe the tree just didn't like you. You begin to whisper good morning to each bush before trimming it. You work alongside a silent monk who waters plants with such reverence you'd think he was baptizing them. He nods at you once per week. That's his version of a hug. Sometimes you're asked to deliver lotus flowers to the Empress's quarters. You carry them like offerings 3 blooms, arranged precisely, stems bound with red string. Once, you accidentally breathe on one. The maid takes it back and replaces it. You never make that mistake again. Still, you begin to enjoy the garden. There's something calming about coaxing beauty from the earth while chaos brews behind palace doors. It reminds you that, despite everything, life keeps growing. And gossip keeps blooming. Even here, among butterflies and koi ponds, the whispers continue. A new official has been seen speaking with the emperor. A favorite concubine is losing favor. Someone has stolen a rare orchid, probably for potion making, or seduction, or maybe just a dare. You prune a branch and listen. You water the lilies and remember. You rake the gravel and wonder how long this place will remember you after you're gone. The archive summons you again. You're not thrilled. After the peaceful whispers of the gardens and the intoxicating thrill of overheard tea gossip, going back to the gray dust of scrolls and ink feels like stepping into an unloved winter. But you obey. You always obey. That's the rule. The summons is vague, just a message tucked into your breakfast bowl. Report to Archive Hall 3 at sunset. Wear clean robes. You arrive just as the last sliver of sunlight presses itself against the window lattice. Inside, Archivist Wren waits, as stern and papery as ever, flanked by two junior eunuchs with identical expressions of polite terror. He doesn't look up, he just says, "Sit." You do. A scroll is unrolled in front of you. It is detailed. Copy this. You examine it. It's a harvest report. 14 pages, all in formal script. Your brush hand twitches slightly in protest. You'll be working here for a while, Wren adds, with the tone of someone assigning a lifetime. And so, once again, you return to the world of grain tallies and rainfall records. You begin with the top margin, stroke by stroke, loop by careful loop. You lose hours to the curves of characters, the spacing of dates, the delicate, almost smug balance of the Imperial seal. As the ink flows, so does your memory. You remember your early failures here, the ink blots, the smudged edges, the time you accidentally wrote horse dung instead of tax deferment, a mistake no one let you forget. Now, your strokes are crisp, graceful, not art exactly, but close enough to please the bureaucrats who will eventually read them. And then, just as you're finding your rhythm, Wren leans over and whispers, "You're fast now. That's good. Time to test you." He pulls out a bundle of letters sealed in crimson wax. They bear the emblem of the Ministry of Rites. These are transcripts from last month's border rituals. We need an edited copy for the Emperor. You blink. Edited? Summarized? Beautified? Clarified? He smiles the faintest smile. Improved. And just like that, you're now part of the imperial bureaucracy's dirtiest secret, the art of helpful rewriting. Historians still argue whether eunuchs exaggerated, censored, or outright forged court documents. The truth? All of the above. But the goal was never deception, it was optimization. The emperor didn't want noise. He wanted clarity, or at least what you decided was clarity. You read the letters. They're chaotic, conflicting. Some say the ritual failed because the drums were out of tune. One blames an improperly salted ox. Another rather hopefully claims that all omens were favorable, but fails to explain why a priest fainted. You rewrite it all into a coherent narrative. The ritual succeeded. The drums were harmonious. The ox was particularly majestic. The priest overcome with divine awe. Nothing to worry about. Wren scans your work and nods. Believable? Boring? Perfect. You spend the next week rewriting history, sometimes literally. And the more you edit, the more you see the seams of the empire. One day, you're handed a report about flooding in the lower provinces, entire rice fields lost, but the rewritten version you produce says minor seasonal overflow, swiftly addressed. You pause before writing that phrase. You pause long enough to feel the weight of it. Somewhere, someone will starve. But your job isn't to solve starvation. It's to calm the court. You find ways to make the disasters sound poetic. Fires become bright lessons. Droughts become a test of communal strength. A broken dam becomes a regrettable but ultimately enlightening hydrological insight. Bo reads one over your shoulder and says, "You're turning bad news into bedtime stories." You sigh. That's not wrong. Still, these summaries earn you praise. Quietly, from the right people, your name begins to carry a certain resonance. Eunuchs in the know start calling you the brush, not loud, not mocking, almost respectful. And with this new nickname comes new privileges. You're allowed to walk certain corridors unaccompanied. You're permitted to sit during select meetings. You're even trusted with the inner library key, a small bronze phoenix you wear on a cord around your neck, like a secret. The inner library is glorious. Shelves stretch to the ceiling. The walls are painted with scenes of scholars sitting under pine trees, arguing about poetry with birds. You're not sure who painted it, but you silently thank them each time you pass. You spend your free hours here, reading, copying, occasionally, hiding under the desk when someone important walks by. One afternoon, while retrieving a scroll about river taxation policy's thrilling stuff, you find something odd tucked into the back of the shelf, a personal letter, old, frayed, unsent. The ink is faded, but the words are clear. It's written by a eunuch, to his sister. He writes about loneliness, about the softness of robes that never feel like they fit, about how he sometimes forgets the sound of his own laugh, about how proud he is, but also how very tired. You sit for a long time, just holding it. You don't show it to anyone. You fold it carefully and place it back where you found it, a little straighter than before. That night, as you copy the next harvest summary, you change only one word, just one. It's a small rebellion, but it's yours. The letter deliveries begin with a smile. Not yours, of course. You haven't smiled in public for months, which is proper. No. The smile comes from Eunuch Jen, a round-faced senior with a gait like melting butter and the social reach of an octopus in a koi pond. He finds you in the archive one morning, balancing 3 scrolls and a half-eaten rice bun. "You," he says, in a tone both familiar and dangerous, "you have a good walk." You blink. Thank you." Steady, soft-footed, looks innocent. You have no idea what he means, which is exactly the point. By nightfall, you're part of Jen's courier circle. Not officially, not on paper, but you carry letters, slipped inside sleeves, tucked behind tea trays, occasionally sewn into hems. You don't read them. That's Rule 1. Rule 2 is deliver only by hand. No intermediaries. If the recipient isn't there, you walk away. Rule 3, forget everything. Not just the contents. Forget the names. Forget the faces. Forget you ever delivered anything. You learn the routes quickly, from the Empress's embroidery pavilion to the rear balcony of the North Hall, from a junior minister's study to a forbidden window behind the bronze incense dog. Every message is delicate. Every message could be dangerous. And yet, some are hilariously mundane. A poem written to impress a court musician. A love confession between 2 junior maids involving metaphors about mooncakes. One scroll simply reads, "Stop singing at dawn." But others pulse with tension. One letter you deliver comes wrapped in silk, tied with a strand of hair, never a good sign. Another bears no seal, but smells faintly of camphor and something older, like rain on an ancestral tomb. Historians still argue whether eunuchs like you were the empire's greatest spies or just glorified messenger pigeons. You're beginning to suspect it's both. The palace doesn't run on rituals or laws, it runs on secrets and those who carry them. You never ask who's sending what, but you start to notice things. The same two recipients are always nervous. One always insists on unwrapping the letter only after 3 bows. The other checks for wax stamps that no longer exist. Then there's the moment, brief, quiet, but unforgettable when you pass a letter to a maid, and she presses her hand to yours just a second too long. You look up. Her eyes say everything: desperation, fear, warning. You nod and walk away. Later, Ping finds you scrubbing ink from your sleeves in silence. Love letter, he asks. Maybe. Blackmail? Could be. Both. You don't answer. The next week, Zhen promotes you to internal runner. That's just a fancy way of saying you deliver messages inside the forbidden parts of the Forbidden City. The places with no sunlight, the places where statues stare too hard, the places where echoes don't come back. You start carrying messages wrapped in layers, one scroll inside another, inside a pouch, inside a decorative fan. Once, you're given a scroll disguised as a dried persimmon. You carry it in a fruit tray, careful not to get hungry. One of your regular routes is to the concubine's wing, not the main hall too obvious, but the older wing, half forgotten, where the less favored still reside like ghosts with hairpins. There, the messages grow stranger. Poems in code, requests for talismans, a plea for a single strand of the emperor's hair. You don't ask, you just bow and deliver. But the oddest message you ever receive isn't sealed, or hidden, or even particularly subtle. It's a note handed directly to you by an elderly maid who smiles like she's handing you a dumpling. It reads, "You are being watched. Don't trust the peacock." That's it. You fold it, burn it, pretend you didn't see the Empress's pet peacock watching you from a balcony that same afternoon. The paranoia sets in quietly. You start walking a little slower, listening to footsteps that may or may not be following you. You leave false messages under cushions. You double back on your routes. One night, Bo corners you by the library. You okay? You nod, tired. You're getting too deep. I'm just delivering scrolls. Exactly. He hands you a dried plum and walks away. You chew it slowly, sour and sweet and grounding. A few days later, Jen disappears. No announcement, no transfer, just gone. His duties are reassigned, his quarters scrubbed, his name, technically, never existed on the message logs. Ping shrugs, retired, maybe. Bo frowns, or silenced. You say nothing, but your next delivery, you hold the scroll a little tighter, and when you bow, you hold it a little longer. Because you understand now, the palace doesn't just feed on loyalty, it feeds on memory. And forgetting gracefully, deliberately is part of survival. Congratulations, you've made it to fish duty. Not metaphorical fish, actual fish. Fat, glittering, suspiciously pampered imperial goldfish. You are now in charge of their care. It sounds absurd at first. You, who have managed poetry salons, palace gossip, and bowel schedule logistics, are now carrying buckets of water and sprinkling powdered shrimp into jade-lined ponds. But nothing in the Forbidden City is ever just what it seems. The goldfish aren't just pets. They're symbols of wealth, longevity, cosmic balance, and, according to one unusually poetic minister, the tranquility of a wise ruler's heart. They are also rumored to be enchanted, though only after dusk, and never on even-numbered days. Your assignment is to maintain Pond 6, not the largest, but the most politically sensitive. Why? Because Pond 6 lies directly outside the meditation chamber of the Crown Prince, which means that if a fish dies, floats, or, heaven forbid, swims too aggressively, it is seen as an omen. If the fish are calm, the future is calm. If the fish are chaotic, well, let's just say someone might lose their job. You receive your instructions from an ancient gardener who smells like plum vinegar and wears socks with tiny dragons embroidered on them. He tells you the feeding times, the optimal ripple conditions, and, very seriously, to never let the white one see its reflection. Why not, you ask? It starts fights, he mutters, walking away. You believe him. So, your mornings begin with water testing. You adjust the lotus leaves for shade, stir the pond gently to simulate natural movement, and drop food from exactly 10 inches above the surface, as prescribed by a scroll written during the Yuan dynasty. The goldfish are named, not by you, of course, by someone far more important. You memorize them all: Prosperity, Balance, Jade Moon, Sighing Petal, and the infamous Cloud Champion, the white one with anger issues. Cloud Champion once bit Balance during a thunderstorm. It was a whole thing. You watch them like a scholar watching stars. You begin to notice patterns. Prosperity circles clockwise. Sighing Petal lingers near the rocks in the late morning. Jade Moon enjoys direct sunlight, but only after the second bell. You're not just a caretaker. You're a behavioral analyst with fins. Then one day, Cloud Champion disappears. You arrive at dawn to find only 4 fish circling the pond. No signs of struggle. No scales. No splash marks. You alert the gardener. He blinks slowly and says, "Well, that's not ideal." The palace goes into quiet chaos. Not full chaos. This isn't the tax ministry, but a tense, simmering concern. The crown prince delays his meditation. The royal astrologer is summoned to see if this portends betrayal, illness, or a poor grain harvest. You are interviewed. Multiple times. What were the ripples like yesterday? Did the white fish seem distant? Has it shown signs of wanderlust before? You answer politely, calmly. You do not suggest it was stolen. You do not imply you fell asleep during your shift, even though, just once, your eyes did close during a particularly slow circling. A week passes, and then Cloud Champion reappears. Just like that. Floating near the surface, gleaming in the morning light, calm as a monk in springtime. No one can explain it. The gardener clucks his tongue. He probably left for a bit. He mutters, "Needed air." You are not sure if that's a joke or a diagnosis. Regardless, your position is secured. No one wants to change the caretaker of the magical vanishing fish. From that day on, ministers nod at you in the corridors. Not deeply, but enough to acknowledge your new, bizarre status. You are the eunuch who kept the balance. Bo thinks it's ridiculous. Fish, really? Cloud Champion vanished. You say solemnly, "He's a fish." He's a sign. Ping, on the other hand, starts asking you for lottery numbers. You continue your duties with renewed care. You talk to the fish when no one is around. You hum to them. You've convinced yourself they recognize your voice. Jade Moon even swims toward your shadow sometimes, which feels like affection. And of course, the gossip never stops. One morning, while trimming lotus leaves, you overhear a conversation between 2 scholars debating the moral consequences of fish theft. One insists that stealing a koi is equivalent to stealing a divine blessing. The other counters that it only counts if the fish has a name. You tuck that away for later. Historians still argue whether goldfish in the Forbidden City held true political power or were just another layer of theatrical symbolism. But from your position, they are theatrics that breathe. And you are part stage hand, part high priest. You start writing poetry again. Just short lines, observations. Ripples like silk robes, one white flash between the reeds. Balance bites again. You don't show anyone. But you fold each poem into a tiny square and hide them under the stone bench beside Pond 6. By autumn, the fish recognize your footsteps, or at least pretend to. You're beginning to feel like a fixture yourself, a quiet presence, reliable, predictable, as ornamental as the fish, perhaps, but not without significance. One morning, as you sprinkle the powdered shrimp, Cloud Champion breaks the surface. Just once. Looks at you. And disappears again. You bow. Not to the fish, but to whatever strange rhythm of fate brought you here, knee-deep in water, ink stains under your nails, and a future no one, not even the astrologers, could have predicted. You never expected to see a battlefield. And technically, you still haven't. But what you're witnessing now is close, just with better robes and significantly more backstabbing via paperwork. You've been reassigned again, this time to an advisory role for a military campaign, which sounds impressive, until you realize it's essentially a traveling liaison post. Your job? Accompany the general, relay messages back to the court, and make sure everything that happens gets reported in flattering, politically correct prose. In short, make the chaos look elegant. You travel in a caravan of silk and steel. There are soldiers, scribes, and a few other eunuchs, each with different specialties: horses, medical supplies, logistics, tea preparation. You, unfortunately, are labeled narrative coordination. Your first challenge comes before you even leave the palace. How should we describe this expedition? In the Emperor's briefing scroll, a senior minister asks. You suggest a swift and necessary demonstration of Imperial clarity. He nods. Clarity is good. Add something about discipline. You add clarity and discipline in the southern prefectures. You're not entirely sure where you're going, but it already sounds noble. The journey takes a week. You ride in the back of a cart filled with blankets, rice sacks, and scrolls that need rewriting. The road is bumpy, the food is cold, and your thighs develop a permanent ache that only poetry and wine could cure if you had either. Still, the air outside the palace is strange and sharp. It smells of pine, earth, and something thrilling unrecorded possibility. You arrive at the garrison town to a trumpet fanfare that seems mostly for show. The general greets you with a bow so shallow it's practically an insult. You bow deeper, because of course you do. General Jin is tall, stern, and deeply skeptical of you. You, the palace ghost, the silk-robed watcher, the one who, with a single sentence, could turn a failed skirmish into a strategic repositioning exercise. You ever seen real combat? He grunts over tea. No, General? You ever held a sword? Not intentionally. He narrows his eyes. Don't get in the way. You don't. Instead, you follow. You take notes. You record troop movements, rations, and, of course, mood. That's your real job, to monitor the mood. Is morale high? Are the soldiers confident? Are the village elders impressed by the ceremonial robes? You document it all. And when you send reports back to the palace, you make sure everything is just slightly better. A scuffle over stolen grain becomes spirited local negotiations. A tent fire becomes an unfortunate but contained ember incident. The general shouting at a clerk becomes firm, motivational leadership. Historians still argue whether eunuchs distorted the truth to gain favor or simply because the court demanded it. In your case, it's neither. You edit because reality, unpolished, would never survive court politics. One afternoon, while observing from a cliff above a small training camp, you see a sparring match get out of hand. Swords clash. A soldier falls. Blood spatters the dust. You flinch? A young aide notices, first time. You nod. He grins. Don't worry. He's fine. Probably. The soldier gets up, eventually, limping but laughing. Still, the image lingers. Later, you find yourself writing a report that includes the phrase, "The troops demonstrated commendable intensity during afternoon drills." It's technically true. You begin to understand something warlike tea service is choreographed, controlled, not in the field, but in the scrolls that explain it afterward. The Empire doesn't want facts. It wants reassurance. Still, you do your best to be accurate, or at least artfully honest. You even include a poem at the end of one report. Steel in sunlit dance, dust rising like Imperial flag's peace, rehearsed in flame. No one comments on it, but you include another in your next scroll anyway. One night, around the campfire, General Jin surprises you. You know, he says, poking at a pot of soup, "My father used to say eunuchs ran the empire." You glance up from your notes. Did he mean it as a compliment? He snorts. He meant it as a complaint. You smile. That sounds about right. He doesn't laugh, but he doesn't argue. Then you're not bad with a brush. Do the men justice. I'll try. No, do better than that. Make them remembered. That night, you stay up writing by candlelight. You record the names of the fallen, the exact layout of the tents, the taste of the soup, sour, but warm. You even draw a map, poorly, but with feeling. A week later, you're called back to the palace. Your escort arrives with a bundle of fresh robes and a sealed summons. Jin claps you on the shoulder surprisingly hard and mutters, "Try not to get soft again." You bow. Back at the palace, everything feels smaller, neater. You breathe in the incense and silk like someone pressing their face against an old, beloved curtain. You are debriefed. You are bathed. You are given a new robe, midnight blue, embroidered with two dragons so subtle they only appear in moonlight. It's a promotion robe. You're now officially a court narrator. Your job? To speak in the Emperor's voice. The robe fits too well. You don't mean physically, though. Yes, it drapes just right. The silk cool against your shoulders. The dragons stitched with a precision that could make a scroll weep. No, you mean symbolically. This robe means access. It means danger. It means you've moved from the shadows of the archive to the flickering candlelight of Imperial attention. You are now part of the Emperor's inner voice. Not his voice exactly. He still speaks, but when he doesn't want to, when the words are tedious, or beneath his dignity, or too politically volatile to be spoken by the Son of Heaven, himself, you speak for him. In other words, you talk so he doesn't have to. It begins with minor announcements, promotions, commendations, the occasional ceremonial. We find this acceptable during banquets. You're trained for this by Grand Eunuch Huo, a man so thin he could slide between doorways. His eyebrows are magnificent, like calligraphy made of hair. Speaking for the Emperor, he explains, is not just tone, it's tempo, volume, and suggestion. Suggestion. He leans close. You must say what he might say. In a way, he could say it, but never in a way he hasn't said something else. You blink. He pats your shoulder. You'll get it. Your first public declaration happens during a courtyard ceremony. The Emperor is present, but silent. You step forward in your new robe, clear your throat, and proclaim. His Majesty acknowledges the loyalty of the Southern Watch and offers his serene encouragement. No one faints. No one interrupts. You survive. You're told afterward that your cadence was appropriately imperial. You begin to understand how this works. You're not just a mouthpiece. You're an echo, a filter, a brushstroke between silence and law. And sometimes, you're a shield. One evening, during a poetry recital in the Lotus Pavilion, a provincial governor stumbles through a clumsy metaphor comparing the emperor's rule to simmering turtle broth. You see the emperor's expression shift barely. A tightness around the eyes. A subtle exhale. You stand. The emperor thanks Governor Liu for his culinary creativity. You say smoothly, and reminds us all that flavor, like virtue, must be simmered carefully. Laughter. Applause. The emperor sips his tea. You sit. Afterward, he says nothing, but you're summoned the next morning and handed a scroll of recent appointments. 3 names are crossed out. A 4th has been elevated. You understand. Historians still debate whether eunuchs like you rewrote policy or merely polished it. But as the months pass, your voice is heard more often than some ministers, and people begin to listen very carefully. You're summoned to every major meeting now. You stand behind the emperor like a shadow with a vocabulary. You learn to read his silences. A blink means move on. A twitch of the fan means elaborate. A sideways glance, you know what to do. You become fluent in Imperial. But fluency is a fragile thing. One morning, you're given a speech to deliver before the Empress Dowager, a tribute to her late husband's unwavering legacy of restraint and simplicity. You read it aloud. The room stills. The Empress Dowager arches one regal eyebrow and says, "Simplicity. He once built a moon-shaped boat with hot springs on deck." You smile. Precisely. A restrained number of hot springs. A beat. Then, to your immense relief, she laughs. "You're clever," she says. "Dangerously so." You bow deeply, lower than usual. But the warning lingers. Power notices wit, and power does not always enjoy being noticed back. You start choosing your words more carefully. And yet, sometimes, you allow yourself a flourish. You begin to embed tiny personal touches in your declarations. Not enough to stand out, just enough to leave a fingerprint. A turn of phrase borrowed from your private poems. A metaphor drawn from coy behavior. A rhythm borrowed from Ping's old humming. No one says anything. But the scrolls you're asked to read grow more elaborate. You begin drafting them yourself. An imperial decree is needed to settle a border dispute, one that, left unresolved, could lead to famine or rebellion. You write, "Let harmony flow like paired reeds, bending but unbroken in the southern wind." The emperor approves it without comment, and the problem disappears. Your words are now policy. Bo, ever the realist, says, "Careful, you're writing the weather." Ping beams and says, "Next, you'll be naming the seasons." You laugh, but not too hard, because, maybe. Still, there are moments you miss your old duties, the quiet of the archive, the gentle rhythm of the scrolls, even the ridiculous diplomacy of the goldfish pond. Sometimes, late at night, you sneak away to that same stone bench and sit beside the fish. They remember you, or seem to. Cloud Champion swims in a lazy circle, as if bored with prophecy. You whisper a poem to them. Even the emperor does not speak in every breath. Some truths are better mouthed by fish. Then you go back to your robes, your dragons, your voice that is not your own. Because this is your role now. And in a palace made of rules, routines, and rituals, you've found the rarest thing of all. A sentence with weight. You glide now. You used to shuffle, hesitate, blend. But since taking on the emperor's voice, your steps have acquired weight, authority without presence. When you enter a room, conversations don't stop, but they lean in. And yet, you've never been more aware of how fragile that power is. You're seated beside a lattice screen, recording the minutes of a high-level meeting between ministers from opposing factions. There's tea, of course, dried plums, the faint scent of crushed magnolia, but none of it softens the tension. Minister Qian, champion of agricultural reform, is arguing for increased grain redistribution to famine-struck provinces. Minister Yao, protector of trade routes and personal rice monopolies, disagrees vehemently. They speak in formal tones, but their eyes are dueling swords. The emperor sits in silence, one finger resting lightly against the rim of his cup. You wait. Eventually, His Majesty gives the signal a subtle raise of his hand. He wants you to speak. You say evenly. His Majesty appreciates the wisdom of his loyal servants and encourages continued unity in the face of adversity. Which is Imperial code for you're boring him? Stop! It works. The ministers bow. The debate pauses. You jot notes in the margin of your scroll like, "Y'all bloated. Kien may explode." Historians still argue whether eunuchs secretly influenced imperial policy or simply moderated tone. But inside this quiet thunderstorm of tea and fan gestures, you realize tone is policy. Your phrasing becomes everything. You once wrote, "The emperor finds this troubling." It caused a week of panic. Later, you revised a decree from unacceptable to in need of reflection. Peace returned like mist over the pond. Your tools are delicate metaphor, nuance, pacing. A misplaced adjective can end careers. A too eloquent phrase may draw attention you don't want. So you sharpen every sentence like a blade, then wrap it in velvet. But it's not all syntax and subtext. There are perks. Your quarters have moved. No more shared dormitory. You now sleep in a private suite behind the North Pavilion, with a lacquered writing desk, a real mattress, and a window that opens to a bamboo grove where birds sing every morning at the exact moment you're trying to sleep in. You're also assigned a junior assistant, a boy named Wen, barely 12, whose job is to fetch your ink, prepare your robe, and keep people from interrupting your flow. He's terrible at all three. But he's sweet and very concerned about how your shoes are arranged. "I aligned them by dynasty," he says proudly one day. You thank him and step into the Tang pair. You also begin receiving invitations not to parties. Of course, you're a eunuch, not a juggler. But to walk through gardens with ministers who suddenly want to clarify your phrasing, or to meet with scholars purely for context. You attend, you listen, you never promise anything. And then you reword their suggestions into something far less self-serving. It becomes a game, subtle edits, small interventions. The court speaks one language. You translate it into another, softer, safer, slightly more poetic. Ping visits you one afternoon. He's thinner now, less laughter, more sighing, still sharp. "You're important now," he says, poking a preserved plum. "When did that happen?" You smile. "Probably when I started calling floods seasonal reconsiderations." He chuckles. "You haven't changed." You have. But you don't say it. That night, you're invited to help draft a speech for the Imperial Spring Festival. A simple address, a blessing, a subtle message to the provinces not to rebel this year. You write, "Let the rivers rise only in joy. Let the seeds sleep only briefly. Let the people hunger only for wisdom." The emperor reads it aloud the next day. The court applauds. The provinces, for the moment, stay quiet. And still, in the shadows, you must navigate. There are factions now. Some ministers resent your proximity to power. Some eunuchs resent your voice carrying more weight than theirs. A few say nothing, but their eyes say plenty. You're followed, subtly. A report goes missing from your desk. A fan left in your quarters smells of opium. Bo visits you under the pretense of delivering tea. He shuts the door quietly and mutters, "Someone wants your ink brush," or your silence. You nod. You've known for a while. So, you become even more careful. You start layering your drafts: the public version, the palace version, and the one the emperor actually sees. You begin speaking less at meetings, but saying more with your silence. One morning, the emperor asks you a question directly. What do you think of this proposal from the Ministry of Rights? You hesitate only a moment. Then your Majesty's silence on the matter already speaks volumes. He smiles. Not warmly, but genuinely? That afternoon, you are granted a gift, a porcelain inkstone carved with dragons chasing a cloud. It's exquisite, handmade, rare. You keep it on your desk, but you don't use it. Instead, you keep using your old stone, the one Ping helped you clean years ago, back when you were just learning to hold the brush steady. Because it still works. And because it reminds you, your voice may belong to the emperor now, but your story is still yours. You didn't mean to buy a monastery. It just sort of happened. The letter came folded in thirds, carried by a servant with no eyebrows and very strong opinions about the correct angle of teacup placement. Inside the letter, a formal offer, a crumbling hillside Buddhist retreat, just outside the capital. Quiet, historic, minor repairs needed, possibly haunted, currently unused. The seller, a minister's cousin's wife's brother. The price suspiciously affordable. You were confused, then flattered, then suspicious again. And finally, after 3 cups of weak jasmine tea and a long conversation with Ping that mostly consisted of, "This is a terrible idea," you said yes. Historians still argue whether eunuchs were allowed to own property, especially property with religious or political ties. The short answer is they weren't. The long answer is unless they were powerful enough. And now, apparently, you are. You never intended to wield this much influence, but power, in the Forbidden City, sticks to you like humidity. One day you're copying grain records. The next, you're the ceremonial abbot of a dilapidated temple. The place, when you finally visit, is indeed atmospheric. There are 3 buildings, one leaning, one slightly more leaning, and one that gave up and collapsed several dynasties ago. There's a pond full of philosophical frogs, a cherry tree that blooms only on odd-numbered months, a bell that rings without anyone touching it, though you suspect wind and dramatic timing. And silence. Thick, soft silence. Not the suspicious hush of the palace, but the gentle kind, like someone paused the world for a moment to breathe. You stand in the center courtyard and realize something: no one is watching you. No footsteps behind you. No fans twitching. No parrot repeating state secrets. You are truly alone. It's terrifying and wonderful. You return to the palace the next day with 3 jars of pickled radish, a small scroll of handwritten sutras, and a vague plan to restore and maintain the site in accordance with ancestral harmony. You file the paperwork. It is approved, automatically. Apparently, no one wants to question the man who speaks for the emperor. And so the monastery becomes your retreat. Not publicly, of course. Officially, it's a cultural asset under restoration, but among trusted friends, Ping, Bo, when you call it the quiet place. You visit monthly. Sometimes you take scrolls, sometimes just tea. One trip, you bring Ping and Bo. Ping immediately lies in the grass and declares the monastery a better friend than any minister. Bo tries to meditate, but gets distracted by a frog staring at him with palpable judgment. You laugh actual out-loud laughter for the first time in weeks. Back in the palace, your colleagues begin to notice a change. You're calmer, slower to anger, quicker to smile. One eunuch whispers, he's either enlightened or plotting something. The answer, of course, is yes. Because with the monastery comes opportunity. A neutral ground. A place to host quiet conversations, private tea ceremonies, spiritual consultations that just so happen to coincide with policy shifts. Nothing official, nothing direct. But if a certain minister visits and leaves feeling more harmonious, and then suddenly supports a tax reform, well, you certainly didn't ask him to. You serve them tea. You listen. You offer a parable about a stubborn goose. You let the cherry tree do the rest. And still, you write. You keep a notebook at the monastery plane, soft-covered, bound with string. In it, you jot observations, poems, and dreams. One entry reads, "A monk swept the same stone path for 40 years. The path never stayed clean, but the sweeping that stayed true." You don't share the notebook, not even with Ping. But it helps. Because the palace is a place of performance, and performance is exhausting, even when you're good at it. Especially when you're good at it. One evening, the emperor himself asks about the monastery. Peaceful, he asks, sipping his chrysanthemum tea. You bow. Yes, your majesty. Useful. You hesitate, then only in that it allows silence to ripen. He nods, slow and unreadable. Don't forget the world makes more noise than it needs, he says, and some of the worst noise wears perfume. You aren't sure if he's warning you or complimenting you, or both. You bow again. That night, you return to the monastery in your dreams. The cherry tree is blooming. The bell is quiet. And the frogs? The frogs have started chanting. It begins, as most disasters do in the Forbidden City, with a peach. More specifically, a stolen peach. You find out about it the way you learn most things these days indirectly. A concubine whispers to a eunuch. That eunuch confides in a laundry clerk. The clerk mutters something in the baths, and suddenly, by the time a fresh robe is laid across your morning stool, you've been handed the thread of a mystery you didn't ask for. Concubine Lee is furious. Wen whispers while polishing your shoes with unnecessary force. She says someone stole her tribute peach. You raise an eyebrow. From her plate. No, he says, lowering his voice. From her poem. You blink. I beg your pardon. Apparently, Concubine Lee composed a peach-themed poem to flatter the emperor. It referenced a particularly rare peach sent from a distant province. The poem was coy, delicate, sensual, even. She read it aloud during an evening recital. But 2 days later, Concubine Yan recited a poem that also mentioned a peach, a rarer one, slightly more flattering, with much more suggestive dew imagery. Concubine Lee accused her of plagiarism. Concubine Yan claimed coincidence. Now the palace is in uproar over fruit. Historians often argue whether the inner court's influence on imperial politics was substantial or simply ornamental. But you've seen firsthand how much power a single metaphor can hold, especially when it's wrapped in silk and jealousy. The emperor, wisely, says nothing, but there's tension in the halls. Tea is poured more cautiously. Even the fish in Pond 6 are swimming farther apart. You're called to intervene not officially, of course, just quietly. You begin by reviewing both poems. Lee's is elegant, classically structured, a soft metaphor for ripening desire. Yan's is sharper, modern, a sly reference to forbidden fruit that's difficult to interpret without blushing. You suspect both women are playing a deeper game. Concubine Lee has been slipping in favor. Concubine Yan is on the rise. Both are using poetry as policy line by embroidered line. You consult with the poetry archivist, a man with eyebrows like feather dusters and a hatred for adverbs. This is dangerous, he mutters, pointing to the scrolls. That line about the fruit that waits until midnight, that's not about peaches. You nod. He adds, I envy their vocabulary, though. Next, you track down the court calligrapher who copied both poems. He confirms the timing. Yan's poem was submitted second, but written first, or so she claims. No witnesses, no drafts, just ink and allegations. Bo, when you tell him, groans. Why do I feel like someone's going to fall into a koi pond over this? You smile, because someone probably will. Ping, on the other hand, is delighted. This is the kind of scandal the frogs at the monastery live for. Still, you need to resolve it. You arrange a chance encounter with both concubines during a moon viewing ceremony. Candles flicker. Perfume swirls. Everyone pretends to be relaxed. You serve tea yourself, not traditional, but symbolically powerful. To concubine Li peach blossom tea with a hint of ginger, to concubine Yan oolong with plum. Both look at you, neither blinks. You bow. Then, as casually as one can, while playing with emotional explosives, you recite a short poem. Two peaches grew upon the tree, one soft, one still unsure, but both, when ripe, did fall the same, and sweetened silence more. There's a pause. Then, to your immense relief, concubine Li laughs. Just once, delicately, like a bell startled in its sleep. Concubine Yan bows her head, ever so slightly. And just like that, the scandal dies, or rather, it is smothered in metaphor. The next day, both poems are archived as variations on seasonal harvest themes. The emperor makes a public comment about preferring oranges, and the kitchen serves mangoes for a week. But something lingers. You find a letter in your sleeve pocket the next morning. No seal, no signature. It reads, "If peaches can fall quietly, so can secrets." You burn it instantly. Historians still debate whether eunuchs managed romantic rivalries or merely observed them. You, however, have the ink stains and anxiety to prove your involvement. And from now on, you are very, very careful when someone hands you a scroll that smells like fruit. Still, you can't help but jot a note in your personal book. Words are sharper than swords and twice as likely to be stolen. Back in the archive, someone replaces the peach inventory scroll with a humorous limerick involving apricots. You suspect Ping, or Bo, or possibly the frogs. You let it stay. Because in a place like this, laughter is rarer than peaches. You're not supposed to think about retirement. That's the unspoken rule. Eunuchs serve until they can't. Then they vanish, transferred to a monastery, assigned to ceremonial duties in dusty side halls, or simply retired in silence with a pouch of rice and a politely worded scroll that says, "Thank you for your service, and please stop talking." But lately, you've been thinking about ducks. More specifically, raising ducks. The idea first visits you one misty morning at the monastery. You're drinking chrysanthemum tea, half watching a frog glare at a drifting leaf, when a pair of ducks waddles across the moss. They are absurd, round, waddling with quiet confidence. One quacks with such conviction that you nearly spill your cup. You decide on the spot that if you ever leave the palace, you'll raise ducks. Wen is horrified. Ducks. Why not? They smell. So do ministers. Ducks poop everywhere. So do ministers. You start collecting notes, sketches, a list of ideal duck breeds. You name the first one, Clarity. Still, you can't say it aloud. Not officially. Because retirement in the Forbidden City isn't a phase, it's a vanishing act. Historians still debate how eunuchs spent their final years. Some retired to temples. Others were gifted land secretly, unofficially. A few faded into ghosthood within the palace itself, haunting archives and gardens like robes full of memory. You begin to observe the retired ones more closely. There's Elder Wu, who walks the outer wall at sunrise, muttering proverbs to squirrels. There's Grand Eunuch Lai, who's been polishing the same bronze incense bowl since your first posting. He now does it with both eyes closed. They don't seem unhappy, just quieter. You speak to Grand Eunuch Huo one afternoon, under the guise of borrowing ink. Do you miss it, you ask? He doesn't look up. Miss what? The work, the voice, the center? He dips his brush. I still polish the center, just with fewer syllables. You nod, unsure what that means, but it stays with you. Then one day, a letter arrives. Not just any letter, the letter. It comes folded in silk, sealed in red wax, marked with a symbol older than your service. You don't need to open it to know what it says. You recognize the script. It's an invitation, an option, a path. The palace would like to honor your years of delicate contribution with gentle release from daily strain. In other words, you can retire. You don't say anything to anyone. You hide the scroll under your mattress for 2 days. Then you bring it to the monastery. You read it aloud to the frogs. They don't respond, but you feel their judgment. That night, Ping visits. He knows. Of course, he always knows. You're leaving, he says, not as a question. I might. Good. The palace doesn't deserve you forever. You nod. Then Bo finds out. He says nothing for a full 5 minutes. Then, what happens to your shoes? I give them to Wen. He'll ruin them. Probably. Bo nods solemnly and walks away. You begin sorting your possessions. Your scrolls, your brushes, the worn silk bag with the poem from the goldfish years, the folded fan from the forbidden hallway, the stone from the archive floor you accidentally chipped and kept. You prepare letters, one to the emperor, one to the empress dowager, one to yourself, which begins. Remember to feed clarity twice a day. And yet, as you prepare to leave, the palace pulls you back. A minister seeks your opinion on a tribute poem. A concubine asks if she may visit the monastery for spiritual alignment. The emperor, yes, himself summons you privately. He pours his own tea. He says, I heard you're considering silence. You nod, for a while. He studies you. Then you were never just a voice, you were a mirror. You bow, lower than usual, not as a servant, as something else. When you leave, he says only, may your ducks be wise. You laugh all the way back to your quarters. The morning of your departure, Wen cries. You hand him your inkstone, the old one, the one you chipped years ago. He clutches it like it's sacred. Ping gives you a scroll of jokes. Bo gives you a dead fish. You hope it's symbolic. A junior eunuch paints your portrait. It looks nothing like you, but you frame it anyway. You wear a robe the color of morning mist. No dragons. Just plain soft silk. You walk through the palace one last time, past the turtle, the parrot, the whispering walls. You stop at Pond 6. Cloud Champion swims to the surface, pauses, then turns away. You smile. Outside the gates, a cart waits. Inside your scrolls, your robes, and a small crate with the label Duck Plans, Fragile. You step in. The wheels creak forward. And for the first time in decades, the palace disappears behind you. No guards, no bells, no one shouting your name. Just the road. And somewhere far ahead, a pond that doesn't care who you used to be. You're home, or at least you're somewhere new that smells like dried straw, sweet ginger soup, and the faint but persistent optimism of duck droppings. Your monastery, technically the emperor's monastery, but spiritually yours is quiet, peaceful, no bells, unless you ring them, no fans snapping open, no voices carefully filtered through metaphor and incense, just frogs, trees, and ducks. Clarity is thriving. By the way, he's grown round, assertive, possibly possessed by the ghost of a minor bureaucrat. He honks with the exact cadence of a tax auditor. You love him immediately. Most mornings begin with the same rhythm. You rise before the sun, feed the ducks, sweep the courtyard with a broom made of bamboo and old scrolls. Yes, those scrolls. Then sit beneath the cherry tree with a cup of tea and the vague hope that no one remembers your name. It's going well until the dragons start showing up. Not real dragons, of course. You'd prefer that, honestly. Real dragons would have the courtesy to roar, or eat a cow, or leave scorch marks. No, these dragons are political. It starts with a letter. A short one, folded neatly, delivered by a courier who bows too deeply and smells faintly of palace ink. The emperor requests your opinion on a curious matter. A minor official in the northern prefectures has spotted a comet. Bright, blue, wrong season. The court astrologers are at war. One claims it heralds a shift in dynastic virtue. Another says it's a reflection off a silver roof. A third insists it's a carp spirit with boundary issues. And the emperor, he wants you to frame the omen. You stare at the letter for a long time, then at your ducks, then at the frogs, then at Clarity, who hisses at a plum pit with the authority of someone who once banned peaches. You sigh. And then, as you've done 1,000 times before, you pick up your brush. You write. The heavens do not contradict the earth. If stars misbehave, perhaps it is the earth that whispers too loudly. You add, let us view the comet not as disruption, but as clarity arriving in strange clothing. You send it off. 2 days later, the Imperial court declares the comet auspicious, though occasionally cheeky. A week after that, a second letter arrives, this time about a dream. The Empress dreamt of a dragon that spoke in riddles. What could it mean? You write back. A silent dragon often guards the noisiest treasure. Poetic enough to be profound, vague enough to be safe. Just like old times, historians still debate whether retired eunuchs influenced court decisions from afar. Some claim they faded quietly into prayer and farming. Others suspect long-distance manipulation via advice scrolls. You're not manipulating anything, of course. You're just replying. Then comes the really strange part. People start visiting. First, it's a minor scribe with questions about metaphor structure. Then, a nobleman whose nephew saw a goat standing perfectly still at midnight. Then a concubine's cousin's friend who wants to sit under the cherry tree and ask absolutely nothing in particular. You serve tea. You nod. You occasionally mutter something like, even moss grows in wisdom if left alone. They leave enlightened. You never invite them. They just arrive, drift through like confused clouds, and vanish. Eventually, Ping shows up again. He stands in the middle of your courtyard, arms crossed, face deeply unimpressed. This place is supposed to be quiet. It is. Then why is there a queue? There is a queue. 4 people, 1 duck, 2 possibly symbolic butterflies. You shrug. Ping sighs and sits beside you. You pour him tea. He sips. Still can't believe you have a duck named Clarity? He named himself. Of course, Ping stays for a week. He helps paint the roof tiles. He recites poems to the frogs. He drafts a satirical tribute scroll titled The Emperor's Rightmost Slipper, which you do not send, but do absolutely keep. One morning, while you're sipping tea and watching the sun pool over the temple stones, he asks, do you miss it? You don't answer right away. Instead, you watch Clarity chase a beetle with unwavering purpose. Then I miss the brush, not the noise. Ping nods. You're still writing, though. Of course, You say, "I'm just not aiming at anyone." And it's true. You still write every day. Little verses, observations, dream fragments. You hide them in tree knots, under stones, in scrolls that aren't meant to be opened. One day, you write. The dragon returns, not with fire, but a question written in stars. You don't send it, but you keep it. Just in case the stars ask again. You don't expect a coup attempt to start with soup. But that's how it begins. Not in a throne room, not in a smoky war tent, in a quiet back corridor of the palace kitchens, where a bowl of lotus root and duck broth is discovered to contain, according to an anonymous informant, ambitions. You're summoned back to the palace with alarming speed. One day you're sketching a diagram of your ideal duck pond. The next, you're riding in a curtained carriage under guard, holding a sealed scroll that simply reads, "Your insight is required." No one says the word coup. That would be impolite, but the moment you step through the palace gates again, the air feels different, tense, taut, as if the walls themselves are bracing for something. Beau meets you near the Jade Garden. He doesn't speak, just hands you a cup of tea and a look that says, "Do not ask questions you already know the answers to." You don't. Instead, you're escorted to a room that wasn't there last time you served, the Hall of Measured Reflection. You suspect it was a broom closet once. Now it's an emergency war room staffed by 3 ministers, 2 generals, and 1 terrified tea boy. They hand you a stack of scrolls, incident reports, movement logs, a strangely poetic letter containing a recipe for broth and a coded threat. Someone within the palace has forged a decree. A powerful one, allegedly from the emperor. It claims that Minister Yao, remember him, the turtle broth metaphor guy, has been granted command of the southern regiments. Except he hasn't. And now, at least 1 regiment has already started marching. You are not a soldier. You've never worn armor. The closest you've come to battle was slipping on a damp tile outside the Empress's perfume chamber. But they've called you because of your specialty tone. If the forgery is real, it will sound imperial. If it's fake, the brushwork or phrasing will betray it. You unroll the decree. At first glance, it's flawless. The seal is crisp, the phrasing elegant, the spacing precisely 11 characters per line. Your fingers twitch. But then you see it. A single word. Resolve. That's the problem. The emperor never uses that word. He prefers clarity. Always. Always. Resolve is too final, too aggressive, too not him. You point it out. The room exhales. Historians still argue whether eunuchs exposed conspiracies through espionage or instinct. You're starting to believe it's both. A plan forms quickly. A counter-decree is drafted. This time, in your hand. You use the word clarity 4 times. You lace the language with elegance, calm, and the unmistakable tone of someone who has never once boiled soup in a hurry. The emperor signs it in person. He doesn't say much, just, "I assume you've kept your brush sharp." You bow. It's never left my sleeve. The next few days are a blur. Messages fly. Riders are dispatched. Yao's regiment is halted mid-march by a suspiciously enthusiastic band of opera performers who happen to be rehearsing in the road. Meanwhile, inside the palace, the forger is identified. You won't name names, but let's just say a certain under-chamberlain who once told you your poem was derivative now finds himself assigned to the northern outhouses for the foreseeable future. The crisis ends not with blood, but with paperwork. The emperor hosts a banquet to restore celestial harmony. You're seated between 2 minor lords who only speak in couplets. It's exhausting. But during dessert, candied lotus and disappointment, the emperor raises a toast. To those who speak not only with truth, but with grace. He does not look at you, but you bow anyway. That night, you wander back through your old corridors. Everything's changed, and everything's the same. The turtle still broods in his hall. The parrot still screams at shadows. The peach trees are in bloom, again, always blooming when you least expect it. You find yourself in the old library. Your hand reaches automatically to the shelf 3rd row, 4th from the left. There it is! Your hidden letter, the one written by a eunuch to his sister, the one you left untouched for all these years. This time, you take it. You read it again, and then, for the first time, you add something. Your silence was never weakness. It was a kind of music. You return the letter, fold it gently, and tuck it back into the shelf. You leave before the sun rises. Back to the monastery. Back to clarity. Back to the frogs who do not care about decrees, betrayals, or metaphorical soup. You've saved the empire with a single word. Again! But your real reward? A duck has laid an egg directly into your left sandal, which you take as the highest honor of all. You don't plan your funeral, you curate it. Because after everything, after scrolls and secrets, fish and feathers, coups and poetry, you've earned the right to decide how you'll be remembered, or at least how your tomb will look. It starts with a dream. You're standing in the archive, older than you are now, dustier, quieter. The scrolls rustle like leaves. A voice, maybe Beau's, maybe your own, asks, "What do you want left behind?" You wake up, and that's that. You begin making lists. Not of regrets, of aesthetics. You want your tomb to have a roof shaped like a closed scroll, a pond with exactly 5 fish for orange, 1 white guess who, a carved stone bench no one is allowed to sit on unless they can recite a poem about ducks. No incense. You hate incense. It always made you sneeze. You submit the request through a very old, very discreet bureaucratic channel. The official in charge reads it, blinks slowly, and says, "It's tasteful? High praise." Ping, of course, is delighted. "I want mine shaped like a dumpling," he says. "You are already shaped like a dumpling." "Exactly. Continuity." Beau just shakes his head. You do realize this means you're officially outlasting your own relevance. "Yes," you say, but with style. You oversee the construction quietly. The workers are respectful, if confused. One carver asks why you want a small mosaic of frogs by the door. You reply, "They're the only ones who never lied to me." He nods, doesn't ask again. Meanwhile, life at the monastery continues. Visitors arrive less frequently now. Word has spread that you've retired from retirement, which is only partly true. You still write, still sweep, still name the ducks, new arrivals, certainty, echo, and an aggressively bald one named Minister Yao. But the scrolls you write these days, they're not reports, not policies, just thoughts, fragments. Some doors only open inward, some doors open once, some doors become walls when you look away too long. You copy your favorite verses into a single book. You call it Whispers Between Tea Leaves. You don't intend to publish it, but you leave it on the temple shelf, just in case someone curious finds it after you're gone. Then, one summer afternoon, something strange happens. A scholar arrives, nervous, sweaty, very earnest. He bows too deeply, introduces himself with too many syllables, and asks if you'd be willing to answer some questions. About you, he says. He's writing a history of the court, the quiet parts, the people behind the fans. You don't have to be quoted, he adds quickly. I just want the truth. You brew him tea. You say nothing. Instead, you hand him a scroll. It reads, "Ask the turtles, Ask the peach trees. Ask the dust between the bricks. He stares at it for a long time, then bows, deeply, this time, but not nervously. When he leaves, he bows to the ducks. You nod in approval. That evening, you return to your tomb. Not to die, just to sit. You bring tea, a brush, a fresh page. And as the sun lowers over the hills, you write. Let this not be a monument. Let this be a bench. Let someone sit here and remember how not to speak. Historians still argue over your legacy. Some say you reshaped the court. Others say you simply survived it with unusual elegance. A few insist you never existed, that you were a collective invention, a composite of several quieter voices. You don't mind. You know who you were. You were the silence that shaped the sentence, the breath before the decree, the duck who outlived the storm. It starts raining on your last day. Not dramatically, not a storm, just a soft, steady drizzle that beads on lotus leaves and slicks the courtyard stones with silver. The ducks are thrilled. Clarity waddles through puddles like an emperor inspecting his reflection. You watch him from under the eaves, warm tea in hand, brush resting across your knees. You know what today is. Not a ceremony, not a farewell, just an ending. One you wrote, rewrote, and then eventually decided not to control at all. The palace hasn't summoned you in months. The visitors stopped. Even the frogs seem less curious. There is nothing left to advise, no secrets left to polish. Your brush hand aches when it rains. Your robes hang a little looser. You've begun forgetting the names of people you used to fear. And yet, you're not afraid. You take your time that morning. You feed the ducks. You light incense for the first time in years, just one stick, cedar and ginger. You sweep the path to the cherry tree with a broom made of fallen pine needles tied with red thread. Wen visits, unannounced, as he always does. He's taller now, wears his hair like a minor minister, and walks with the same shuffling softness you once perfected. He bows low, then offers you a rice cake wrapped in paper. No message this time, you ask. No, just thought you'd want one. You smile. You sit together beneath the cherry tree, the rain ticking gently on the leaves. He updates you on the palace, the new eunuchs, the old ministers, a parrot who now recites proverbs out of order, confusing everyone. I still use your inkstone, he says. Good. I write slower, though. You nod. That's how you know it matters. He leaves before midday. You don't say goodbye. He doesn't bow on the way out. He just turns once, smiles, and disappears down the misty path between pines. Later, Ping and Bo arrive together. They don't say much. They bring candied plums. They argue about whose ducks are fatter. Bo insists his duck, restraint, is learning calligraphy. Ping declares his duck simply is calligraphy. You all laugh, the kind of laughter that comes only after decades of too much, too many, and just enough. And when they leave after tea, after silence, you walk slowly to your room. You change into simple robes. You open the scroll you've been keeping under your pillow. It's blank. You knew it would be. You smile, set your brush beside it, and lie down. Not dramatically. Not like a hero. Just quietly, the way you always preferred. The rain continues. The ducks do not notice. Clarity waddles in circles, muttering softly, still convinced he's running something. He probably is. And now, as the scrolls close, as the ink fades into the fibers of old vellum and softer dreams, you drift into the kind of quiet only 1,000 pages can earn. The palace grows still in your memory. The corridors no longer whisper. The bells no longer call. There is only the soft hush of silk on stone, and the occasional echo of a name that was once yours, but no longer needed. The cherry blossoms are blooming. The koi are circling beneath the surface, their movements slow and certain, as if painting poems with their fins. You feel the weight of your old robes lifting, replaced by something lighter linen, perhaps, or simply air. You are not leaving. You are becoming something else. A silence with shape? A story with no need to be told again. So let the scrolls close. Let the ink dry. Let your breath soften. And may the ducks, wherever they are, remember you kindly.